The first rays of sunlight crept through the gap between the drapes, forming a golden streak on the parquet of my bedroom. 7 in the morning. I opened my eyes and just lay there for a few minutes, getting used to the idea that there was no need to rush today, no need to check student papers, make breakfast for Randall, or answer Tobias's annoying phone calls. Every morning belonged to me now, and that fact still seemed strange. My name is Castilla Harlow, and in 3 days I will be 66 years old. For the past 2 years, I've lived alone in a large house on Willow Creek Drive, the most prestigious street in North Irving. The house that Randall and I bought 27 years ago when his printing business was starting to make a serious profit. Looking back now, I realize it was the peak of our family happiness. A new house, Tobias going to college, my husband finally being recognized for his years of hard work, and me happily teaching American literature at a community college. Carefully lowering my feet off the bed, I pulled on my house shoes and threw on the silk robe Randall had given me for our last anniversary. The big house greeted me with silence. Sometimes that silence felt like a blessing, especially after the noisy visits of the grandchildren. Sometimes it was an unbearable reminder of loss. Randall died 4 years ago. The heart attack happened right in the print shop while he was checking out new equipment. Quick and ruthless. He didn't suffer, and I still don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Didn't have time to say goodbye, didn't have time to say the important things. I guess no one ever has time. I made myself a cup of tea and avocado toast, a small morning luxury I allowed myself on Tuesdays. My gaze slid absent-mindedly around the kitchen, where every single thing held a memory. A porcelain tureen brought back from a trip to Provence, a set of kitchen towels with quotes from classic literature, given by colleagues at retirement. Magnets on the fridge from former students who had traveled across the country. The phone rang at 8:15 sharp, right on Merritt's schedule. Castilla, good morning. Her sister-in-law's voice sounded cheerful and businesslike. I hope you haven't forgotten that you're picking up the kids from school today. I have an important presentation for a new client I can't cancel. I suppressed a sigh. Of course I remembered. I always remembered the obligations I had. My grandma duty schedule was written out a month in advance on the calendar hanging next to the refrigerator. Yes, Merritt, I remember. I'll pick up Evelyn and Parker at 3:30. That's great! And we may have to stay a little longer. Can you feed them dinner? I left money for pizza last time. Use it. There wasn't even a hint of a question in her voice, just an affirmation. As if my time had no value, as if I couldn't have plans of my own. Actually, I had a meeting scheduled with Dorothy at 6, I said carefully, referring to my longtime friend and colleague. A short pause followed, then a light chuckle. Castilla, you do realize this is an important client, right? My promotion depends on this presentation. I'm sure Dorothy will understand if you reschedule your meeting. I could feel my facial muscles tensing, forming a polite smile that Merritt couldn't even see. Years of teaching had taught me to keep my emotions under control. Of course I'll call her, I replied, taking a sip of my cooled tea. After the conversation, I looked at my reflection in the living room mirror. My gray hair was in a neat bun, and there were fine lines around my eyes that Randall called laugh marks. I looked decent for my age, but something in my eyes had changed over the years. Some kind of weariness? A humbling? When did that happen? When had I gone from Castile Harlow, a 30-something literature teacher, a woman with her own ambitions and opinions, to a convenient grandmother willing to accommodate other people's schedules? I opened the hall closet and pulled out a photo album. Our wedding to Randall, me in a modest cream dress, him in a rented suit, but looking as proud as if it were from a top tailor. Travel shots, us in front of the Eiffel Tower, at the Coliseum, on the beaches of Florida, Tobias's birth, the tiny bundle in my hands and the stunned happiness on our faces, his graduation from high school, his enrollment in college, his wedding to Merritt, the birth of grandchildren, Evelyn, now 11, and Parker, who is 8. Our family seemed perfect in those glossy pictures, well-to-do, smiling people. No one could have guessed what was behind them. After Randall's death, things changed imperceptibly, gradually. Tobias took over the print shop, though he'd never taken much interest in his father's business. He preferred to hire a manager and concentrated on his career in finance. The print shop continued to generate a steady income, some of which came to me as the founder's widow. At first, their concern seemed touching. Tobias and Merritt stopped by every weekend, bringing groceries and asking how I was doing. Then gradually these visits began to be accompanied by requests. Mom, can you pick up the kids from school? We have an important meeting. Castilla, you wouldn't mind babysitting Parker, would you? He has a slight cold and we need to go to this fundraiser. Mom, remember when you said you wanted to help with the down payment on the house? Now's a great time. I never said no. Randall always said family was the most important thing, and I believed that. I wanted to be a good mother, a generous grandmother. Before I knew it, I had gone from being the person who was asked to the person who was told. Closing the album, I walked over to the bookshelves that took up an entire wall of the living room. Books had been a lifelong passion of mine, from the tattered volumes of Dickens inherited from my father to the contemporary authors I was discovering for myself and my students. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling a familiar calm. After I retired 3 years ago, I planned to write my own book, an analysis of female characters in 20th century American literature. I gathered materials, made sketches. The folder of notes still lay in the drawer of my desk, untouched. Between taking care of Randall, who was ill, and then her grandchildren, there was no time for her own projects. The phone rang. Tobias this time. Mom? Hi. His voice sounded hurried. Merritt said you're picking up the kids. Great. Listen, I was thinking about your birthday. We made reservations at Lavender Terrace for 7 o'clock Friday night. It's a new restaurant, very trendy. Everyone's talking about it. I nodded silently, though he couldn't see it. Lavender Terrace was known as a place for business meetings and networking, a loud, pretentious place, the opposite of the cozy restaurants I preferred. Sounds great, I said, because that's what he was expecting. Great. I made a reservation for 6. Merritt and I, the kids, you and... He paused. Do you mind if I invite Griffin Welch? He's a potential investor, and it would be nice to introduce him to the family in a casual setting. Something just snapped inside. My birthday, 66 years old, and even that was a day they planned to use to advance their interests. Tobias, I thought this was going to be a family dinner, I said quietly. Mom, it will be, just with a little helpful addition. Griffin is a very interesting man, you'll like him. He's traveled a lot, collects art. I felt my hand gripping the phone tighter. Okay, Tobias. After the conversation, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the manicured garden. Randall always said it was my talent for turning a space into an oasis. Every bush, every flower had been planted by my hands. The gardener came twice a week now because Tobias felt that, at my age, I shouldn't bother with such things. I walked over to the dresser and opened the top drawer. There, under a stack of scarves, was a box containing the pearl necklace Randall had given me for my 20th wedding anniversary. I decided to wear it for my birthday, even though Merritt had once remarked that pearls were a little old-fashioned for the modern woman. At 3 o'clock, I left the house in time for my grandchildren's school. My sedan, purchased while Randall was still alive, looked modest against the gleaming SUVs and sports cars of the other parents and grandmothers waiting outside the school. Tobias repeatedly offered to help buy a new car, but I refused. This car was reliable, like most things in Randall and I's life. Evelyn and Parker ran out of the school with backpacks that seemed too big for their skinny shoulders. Grandma Cass! Parker was the first to run to the car, his blonde hair disheveled from running. Evelyn approached more slowly, with the dignity of an almost teenager, but I could see the smile she was trying to hide. Hi, little ones. I hugged them, smelling the familiar scent of baby shampoo and school stationery. How was your day? On the way home, they talked about school. Parker had gotten an A on his science project, and Evelyn had been chosen to be in the school play. I listened, I asked questions, I rejoiced in their successes. These moments were real, genuine. The kids weren't pretending, weren't using me. They were just being themselves, boisterous, energetic, sometimes cranky, but always real. At home, I helped them with their homework. Evelyn was writing an essay about a favorite book, and I enjoyed discussing Louisa May Alcott's Little Women with her. Parker struggled with math problems, and we drew diagrams together to make abstract numbers easier to understand. At 6:30, as we were finishing dinner with delivered pizza, the doorbell rang. Tobias and Merritt entered the house, both in strict business suits, phones in hand. Mom, thank you so much. Tobias kissed me on the cheek and immediately turned to the children. Come on, we have more to do today. Merritt glanced around the kitchen, noticing the leftover pizza. Fast food again? She sighed. Castilla, we were talking about eating healthy. I remained silent as I helped Parker pick up the scattered toys. Merritt, meanwhile, was checking Evelyn's homework, frowning her eyebrows. This analysis is too simple for your age, she said. You have to dig deeper if you want to get into a good school. Evelyn lowered her eyes and I felt a wave of irritation rising inside. The essay was perfect for an 11-year-old, sincere and full of love for literature. Merritt, she did a great job, I said softly. Evelyn had captured the essence of the book, the importance of family bonds and female independence. Merritt raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she continued packing up the children's things. As they left, Parker gave me a big hug. Grandma, can we bake those chocolate chip cookies next time? He whispered. I smiled and nodded, ignoring Merritt's disgruntled look. After they left, I returned to the quiet house. I called Dorothy, apologizing for canceling our meeting. She understood she was a grandmother of 3 grandchildren herself. Castilla, she said before we said goodbye. Don't forget to think of yourself sometimes. You give away too much. I pondered her words as I sat in the living room chair with an unread book on my lap. When was the last time I'd done something solely for myself? Traveling to New Mexico 2 years ago to visit the Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit? No. Even then I cut the trip short because it was Tobias and Merritt's anniversary and they wanted me to babysit. The next day I went to the mall to buy a dress for an upcoming birthday party. At the store, the clerk, a woman about my age, helped me pick out an elegant navy blue dress with long sleeves. It would look great with pearls, she remarked. And I smiled, thinking about my necklace. As I passed the bookstore, I couldn't resist going inside. The smell of new books, the quiet music, the muffled voices of the customers all created an atmosphere where I felt at home. I bought a new novel by an author I had long wanted to read and a collection of Mary Oliver's poems. In the evening, over a cup of tea, I opened the collection to a random page and read, Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? The line echoed in me with unexpected pain. What had I been doing with my life for the past few years? Waiting, adjusting, becoming more and more invisible. On Thursday, the day before my birthday, Tobias stopped by after work. He rarely showed up alone without Merritt and the kids, and I was surprised to see him on the doorstep. Mom, do you have a minute? He asked as he came into the living room. There's something important I want to discuss. I offered him tea, but he declined, just took a glass of water and sat in the chair across from me. Tobias looked like a successful man in his 42 years, well-groomed, confident, with a slight gray on his temples that made him look like Randall at the same age. Mom, he began, setting his glass on the coffee table. Merritt and I have been discussing this for a long time, and we've decided that we need to have a serious talk with you. I tensed, expecting a conversation about my health or a possible move to a nursing home, a topic Merritt had delicately brought up a couple times under the guise of concern. The thing is, Tobias continued, looking not at me but over my shoulder, this house is too big for you alone. 4 bedrooms, a huge garden. It's a constant worry and expense. I waited silently for the rest of the conversation, though I already knew where it was going. Merritt and I thought it would be rational if you gave the house to us. Evelyn and Parker are growing up and need more space. The school here is great, and we'll help you find something compact and comfortable, maybe in that new assisted living complex. He spoke quickly, businesslike, as if he were offering a mutually beneficial deal, not taking my house a house full of memories of every year with Randall, every family holiday, every quiet evening with a book by the fireplace. Tobias, I said slowly, this is my home, your father and I. He wrinkled his nose slightly, as if I hadn't realized something obvious. Mom, it's just a building. The memories will stay with you. Think about it logically. Why do you need so many rooms? You spend most of your time in the living room and bedroom anyway. And it's expensive to run a house. I can manage the expenses, I argued. The income from the print shop and my pension. And that money could be used for something more important, he interrupted. like the Evelyn and Parker Educational Foundation. College is getting more expensive every year. I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest. He talked about my house, my money, as if it already belonged to him, like I was a temporary inconvenience on the way to inheritance. Let's discuss this later, I said, rising from my chair. Tomorrow is my birthday, and I'd rather not think about such things right now. Tobias looked displeased but nodded. Of course, Mom. Just think about it, okay? It's a sensible decision for all of us. After he left, I sat still for a long time, staring at the picture of Randall on the mantelpiece. He was smiling, holding his first serious contract for his print shop. What would he say now? Would he advise concession for the sake of keeping peace in the family? Or would he resent the way his son was treating his mother? I didn't sleep much that night, thinking about tomorrow's birthday and the conversation with Tobias. Something was changing inside me, slowly but inexorably. It was as if all the unspoken resentments, all the swallowed objections, all the concessions of the last few years were gathering into one resolve. The morning of my birthday began with a phone call. Dorothy was the first to congratulate me. Her voice, warm and sincere, made me smile. Castilla, happy birthday, dear. 66 is just a number. You're still the same girl who once argued with the dean about the meaning of symbolism in Faulkner. I laughed, remembering that long-ago incident. We talked for almost an hour about books, about our former jobs, about future plans. Dorothy had recently signed up for a watercolor painting class and was pressing me to join. It's time to do what I've always wanted to do, she said before saying goodbye. Time is of the essence, Castilla. After the conversation, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror for a long time. The dark blue dress I'd bought for tonight fit my figure perfectly. I wore a pearl necklace, a little perfume Randall's favorite scent with notes of jasmine and vanilla. I put my hair in a simple but elegant style. In the reflection, I saw a woman who had lived a long life with joys and losses, with love and disappointments. A woman who still felt strong and willing. The day passed quietly. A few former co-workers sent congratulatory messages. A neighbor, Mrs. Lawrence, dropped by with a homemade lemon cake, small but with 6 candles, one for each 10 and one more for good luck. We drank tea together, and that simple moment of sincerity warmed my soul. Tobias called at noon, reminding me of the evening meal. His voice sounded concerned. He was worried about whether I'd have time to get ready, whether I'd be able to find a restaurant, even though I'd lived in Irving all my adult life and knew the city as well as he did. Better take a cab, Mom, he advised. Parking might be a problem there. I agreed, though I preferred to drive myself. It was easier than arguing. By 6:30, I was all set. I hailed a cab, as Tobias had suggested, even though Lavender Terrace was only 15 minutes away. I sat in the back seat and watched the familiar streets of Irving, the city that had become my home 40 years ago, when Randall and I had moved here with dreams of a better life. The restaurant was in a new business district, a glass building with a pretension to architectural sophistication. Inside, everything shone with modern minimalism: white walls, chrome details, live plants in geometric cache pose. I was immediately uncomfortable with the coldness of this interior, but I tried to keep a positive attitude. After all, today was my day. Tobias, Merritt, and the children were already waiting at the table. Next to them sat a middle-aged man in an impeccable suit, apparently Griffin Welch, the potential investor. Mom! Tobias came up to me, his smile a little strained. Happy birthday! He hugged me, and in that hug I felt aloof, as if he were performing an obligatory ritual. Merritt stood up too and pecked my cheek, leaving a light trace of expensive lipstick. Castilla, you look beautiful, she said with the professional smile of a public relations professional. Is that a new dress? I nodded, noting to myself that she hadn't said a word about my birthday. Evelyn and Parker were unusually subdued, as if instructed in advance on the rules of behavior. Only Parker's eyes flashed with genuine childlike curiosity when he noticed the small gift box in my hand. I'd prepared small souvenirs for the children, though usually the birthday presents were given to the birthday boy, not given to him. Grandma Cass, he whispered as I sat down next to him. Happy birthday. I smiled and discreetly squeezed his small palm under the table. Castilla, Tobias caught my eye. I'd like you to meet Griffin Welch. Griffin, this is my mother, Castilla Harlow. The man rose gallantly and shook my hand. Mrs. Harlow, it's a pleasure to meet you. Tobias has told me a lot about you. His handshake was firm, his gaze appraising, typical of a businessman used to reading people quickly. Only good things, I hope, I replied with a slight smile. Of course. Griffin sat back down, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt perfectly. He mentioned that you taught literature. I had to admit it was my favorite subject in college. I doubted his sincerity. His tone had a habit of saying what he wanted people to hear. But I played along, mentioning several authors who are usually included in college programs. While we exchanged pleasantries, the waiter brought out menus. Massive folders with leather covers and minimalist designs. The prices were astronomical, and I couldn't help but think about how many good books could be bought for the cost of a single steak here. I ordered champagne, Tobias announced as a second waiter came over with a bucket of ice and a bottle. Dom Perignon, special occasion. The champagne was poured into glasses. Even the children were given a small glass of the non-alcoholic drink so they could participate in the toast. To Mom, Tobias raised his glass. Happy birthday. I wish her health and... He hesitated for a moment, and I could almost feel him searching for the right words. What should I wish a 66-year-old widow? Happiness? Love? New accomplishments? It all seemed out of place in his picture of the world, where I was an old woman leaving the stage. Serene days, he finally finished. Serene days. As if I'd already lived my life, and all I had left was to fade away in a rocking chair. Thank you. I took a sip of champagne, feeling the bubbles tingle my tongue. Though I hope my days are not only serene, but fulfilling. I still have many plans. Tobias smiled indulgently, the way one smiles at a child who tells one of his intentions to fly to the moon. The conversation at the table flowed from topic to topic, mostly through the efforts of Merritt, who knew how to keep the conversation going in any company. They talked about the latest city news, about the kids' school, about a promising new restaurant that had opened in the business district. I mostly listened, responding when I was addressed directly. Griffin talked about his travels in Asia, his collection of modern art, his new investment opportunities. Tobias caught his every word, glancing at me occasionally, as if checking to see if I was making the right impression on his potential partner. When the hors d'oeuvres arrived, the conversation shifted imperceptibly to business. Tobias and Griffin were discussing a project, using professional jargon that was giving me a headache. Merritt interjected occasional comments, showing her awareness of her husband's business. The kids were quietly picking at their plates of elaborate dishes, clearly preferring the pizza we'd had yesterday. Grandma, Parker whispered to me while the adults were engrossed in discussing the real estate market. I drew you a card, but Mom said we'd get you a real present later. I smiled at him. The card you drew is the real gift, the best one. His face brightened but immediately turned serious when Merritt threw him a warning glance. Between the appetizers and the main course, the waiter brought me a small cake with a single candle, obviously a tribute to tradition from the restaurant. Tobias looked slightly annoyed by this violation of his carefully planned evening. We ordered dessert at the end, he said to the waiter, who apologized and hurried away, leaving the cake on the table. Blow out the candle, Grandma, Evelyn asked, showing childlike enthusiasm for the first time that evening. I took a deep breath and blew out the flame, making a wish, simple and complex at the same time. To live my life, not someone else's. When the main courses were served, exquisite portions that looked more like works of art than food, Tobias put down his fork and looked at me with that special smile I'd learned to recognize as a child. It was the smile he used to give me before he asked me for something important, a new bike, permission to go to the lake with friends, extra money for college. Mom, he began, blotting his lips with a napkin. Remember our conversation yesterday? I felt the muscles in my neck tense up. So he'd decided to continue the topic at home right here in public on my birthday. Obviously, the conversation had been pre-planned, perhaps even involving Griffin, who could give professional real estate advice. I remember, I replied discreetly. I think this would be a good time to discuss this with the family, Tobias continued, glancing at Merritt, who nodded at him faintly. And with Griffin, who has a lot of experience in these situations. What kind of situations? I asked, even though I knew exactly what I was talking about. In situations where you need to make good use of real estate, Griffin interjected, and it was clear to me that his presence was no accident, especially when it comes to family assets and estate planning. Inheritance. That was it. It wasn't just the house, but everything that would be left behind. I suddenly felt like I was already dead in their eyes, just an obstacle in the way of my desired estate. We've given it a lot of thought, Tobias continued, looking into my eyes with an expression of fake concern. And we think the smartest solution is for you to turn the house over to us, right now. Where am I supposed to live? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We've thought about that too, Merritt said, brightening up. There is a wonderful complex for the elderly called Sunny Terraces. It has excellent facilities, medical staff, lots of activities for your age. For your age. That phrase cut me like a knife. I wasn't a decrepit old woman in need of constant care. I was a full-figured woman, capable of making my own decisions about my life. I don't need a nursing home, I said quietly but firmly. This isn't a nursing home, Mom. Tobias frowned. It's a modern assisted living facility. A lot of successful people your age choose that option. And if I don't want to? Then you might consider a small apartment, Griffin interjected, as if he had a right to participate in the discussion of my life. I've got some great options in new apartment complexes. Compact, modern, close to shopping centers. I looked at him in bewilderment. Who gave him the right to offer me housing? Who had invited him to participate in this conversation? Castilla. Merritt put her hand on mine. Her voice honeyed the same tone she used for difficult clients. We all want what's best for you. A big house requires constant upkeep, and at your age... At my age, yes, I finished for her. You've mentioned my age several times this evening. There was an awkward silence. The children looked from me to their parents, sensing the tension but not understanding why. Mom? Tobias changed tactics, his voice almost pleading. Think of the children. They need more space to develop. Evelyn is a soon-to-be teenager, and she needs a separate room to study in. Parker dreams of a big yard to play in, and your house is perfect for a young family. What's wrong with your current house? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Their 3-bedroom townhouse in a trendy neighborhood was too small for their growing ambitions. It's in the wrong neighborhood, Merritt answered. The schools there aren't the best. Your neighborhood has great educational opportunities. I remembered how they'd chosen this townhouse 3 years ago. Fashionable, upscale, within walking distance of the best restaurants in town. They didn't care about schools back then. And frankly, Tobias added, lowering his voice, financially, it makes the most sense. You get your pension and the income from the print shop. That's more than enough for a modest life. And maintaining a large house is an unnecessary expense. A modest life. Another phrase that defines me as someone whose needs and wants no longer matter. So you want me to give you the house that Randall and I bought with the money I've earned through years of hard work and move into a compact home? Because at my age, I need to live a modest life, I said slowly, feeling something like anger rise up inside of me, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. You've got it all wrong. Tobias looked annoyed. We're offering a practical solution for everyone. It'll be easier for you, more convenient for us. What about my convenience? My wishes? Mom, be reasonable. His tone became condescending. At your age, you have to be practical. The house will stay in the family, just passed on to the next generation. Isn't that what Daddy would have wanted? The mention of Randall was the last straw. I knew my husband better than anyone at this table, and I was sure he would never approve of treating me that way. Don't tell me what your father would have wanted. My voice was quiet, but there was a note of steel in it. Randall wanted me to be happy and live life to the fullest until my last day, not exist in a compact dwelling, giving away everything I have while I'm still alive. Castilla, you're being dramatic, Merritt intervened. No one is talking about giving everything. We're only talking about a house that's too big for one person. And what's next? I asked. The print shop? The savings? What else do you consider too big for me? Tobias and Merritt exchanged quick glances, and I realized I'd hit the mark. The house was just the beginning. Maybe we should discuss this at home instead of at the restaurant, Tobias suggested, noticing that the neighboring tables were beginning to show interest in our conversation. Why postpone it? I asked. You specifically chose my birthday for this conversation. Did you think I couldn't say no on a day like this? Or that the presence of a stranger, I nodded at Griffin, who looked a little embarrassed, would make me more agreeable? Mom, Tobias sounded a warning. I'm not giving you the house, I said firmly. Not now, not later. It's my house, and I'll live in it as long as I want to. There was a heavy silence. Tobias looked at me with ill-concealed irritation. Merritt kept her smile professional, but there was a look of displeasure in her eyes. Griffin was diligently studying the contents of his glass. The children looked frightened. I suggest we end this conversation, I finally said, setting my napkin aside. It's my birthday, and I'd like to spend it without discussing how to get rid of me and my possessions. No one wants to get rid of you, Mom, Tobias started, but I held up my hand to stop him. Let's just have dinner, I said. We'll talk about business some other time. The rest of the dinner passed in a tense atmosphere. Tobias and Merritt discussed some neutral topic, carefully ignoring the awkwardness of the situation. Griffin kept up the conversation politely, though he clearly felt out of place. The kids were completely quiet, with only occasional sympathetic glances at me. When dessert arrived, a dainty cake decorated with gold foil, I could barely swallow a bite. My throat lumped, and my mind raced with thoughts of how, even on my birthday, I'd been nothing more than a means to an end. The evening finally came to an end. Tobias paid, defiantly declining my offer to split the bill. We went outside, where the cool evening air offered some relief from the stuffy atmosphere of the restaurant. I'll call a cab, I said, pulling out my phone. No need, we'll give you a ride, Tobias objected. It's on the way. I'd rather take a cab, I said firmly. I want to be alone for a while. He looked offended, but didn't insist. Merritt said goodbye to me coolly. The kids hugged me Parker tightly, Evelyn with the awkwardness of a teenager who didn't know which side he was on. I'll see you this weekend, Tobias said one last time. And Mom? I'm sorry if we ruined your evening. We meant well. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Griffin shook my hand in farewell, his face a strange mixture of sympathy and professional interest. He was probably already calculating how the family conflict would affect a potential deal. The cab arrived a few minutes later. Sitting in the back seat, I stared at the city lights floating by and felt the resolve building inside. Did they want my house? Did they only see me as an older woman whose wants and needs didn't matter? Were they planning my future without me? Well, I would show them that Castilla Harlow was still capable of making her own decisions, and to do so without words or drama. Silently, but firmly. As the cab pulled up to my house, a big, beautiful house full of memories, I already knew exactly what I was going to do tomorrow. And that decision would change not only my life, but also the lives of those who thought they could control it as they saw fit. Saturday morning greeted me with an unusual clarity of thought. I awoke before the alarm clock rang, feeling surprisingly rested despite my restless sleep. Lying in bed, I watched the sunlight gradually fill the room and mentally made a plan of action. No doubts or hesitations, just a clear sequence of steps to take. The first thing I did was open my laptop and typed Best Realtors Irving into the search engine. After looking at several websites, I opted for Premium Estate Agency. They specialized in luxury real estate and had impressive reviews. At 9 o'clock when the office opened, I called and made an appointment for a consultation with Veronique Sullivan, a senior broker with 20 years of experience. May I ask what property you plan to sell? The secretary asked in a melodious voice. A house in North Irving, Willow Creek Drive, I answered. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, half an acre lot. There was an interested pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Harlow, Veronique will be able to see you today at 11. Is that convenient? I agreed, realizing that the instant reaction was not so much due to my courtesy as to the location of the house, one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods. After breakfast, I cleaned up, choosing a sand-colored pantsuit, an outfit that always gave me confidence for important college meetings. I didn't want to look like a sweet grandma who could easily be talked into unfavorable terms. The premium estate office was located in a modern glass and stone building in the business district. The interior was impressive in its understated luxury: marble floors, leather sofas, paintings by contemporary artists on the walls. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect hair, ushered me into Veronique's office. Veronique Sullivan turned out to be a woman about my age, stylish, with short-cropped silver hair and a penetrating gaze. She got up from the table to shake my hand, and I immediately felt I'd made the right choice. "Mrs. Harlow, nice to meet you. Please sit down." She pointed to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "So, you want to sell the house on Willow Creek? May I ask why?" "I want to move to the sea," I answered simply. "The house is too big for me alone, and I've decided to start a new chapter in my life." Veronique nodded understandingly, not asking too many questions. Her professionalism was evident in the fact that she got straight to the point, not trying to dig into my personal motivations. "Do you have pictures of the house? Or perhaps we could arrange an inspection soon." I pulled a clipboard out of my purse and showed her the photos I'd taken before coming here. Veronique scrutinized each picture, sometimes asking specific questions about repairs, utilities, and layout. "The house is in excellent condition," she said after looking at all the pictures. "And the location is perfect. The neighborhood is in great demand, especially among families with school-aged children because of its proximity to prestigious schools." I nodded, thinking that was one of Tobias and Merritt's arguments. "What price do you plan to set?" I asked. Veronique tapped her long, manicured fingernails thoughtfully on the table. Considering the market, the location, and the condition of the house, she quoted an amount that made me raise my eyebrows. The price was much higher than I'd expected. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Isn't that a little optimistic?" Veronique smiled with the slight condescension of an expert. "Mrs. Harlow, prices in your neighborhood have increased 30% in the last 5 years. Many families are willing to pay a premium for the opportunity to live near the best schools. Plus, there aren't many offers of this quality on the market right now." We discussed the details of cooperation, the agency's commission, the sales strategy, and the expected time frame. Veronique suggested not organizing public showings, but working directly with pre-selected potential buyers. "I have several clients who have been looking for a house in your neighborhood for a long time. With your permission, I'll contact them today." I nodded, feeling a little dizzy from the speed at which events were unfolding. Yesterday, I hadn't planned to sell the house, and today I was already discussing the specifics of the deal. "There's one more thing," I said, lowering my voice. "I'd like this sale to remain confidential until the deal is finalized. I don't want to disturb the family before it's finalized." Veronique nodded understandingly, showing no surprise. She'd probably seen enough family situations over the years not to ask too many questions. "Of course, we can organize the process as discreetly as possible." As I left the premium estate office, I felt a strange mix of emotions: determination, slight anxiety, and something akin to anticipation. For the first time in a long time, I was making an important decision based on my own desires and not on the expectations of others. The next item on my plan was to meet with a lawyer. I called Malcolm Higgins, who had helped Randall and me draft the will 15 years ago. His secretary said at first that the nearest available appointment wasn't for another week, but when I mentioned my name and the nature of the matter, a time was found that afternoon at 2 o'clock. Malcolm's office was located in a historic building in the center of town, the exact opposite of the modern minimalist real estate agency. Dark wood paneling, massive furniture, and bookcases filled with legal volumes created an atmosphere of stability and tradition. Malcolm himself, a large man in his 70s with bushy gray eyebrows and a penetrating gaze, greeted me like an old acquaintance, even though we hadn't seen each other in years. "Castilla, good to see you." He pointed to the chair across from his desk. "What can I do for you?" "I need to change my will," I said bluntly, "and to get advice on the disposition of my estate." Malcolm nodded, not seeming surprised. "What exactly do you want to change?" "Everything," I answered. I'm selling the house and I plan to revise the distribution of the inheritance considerably. Now he was really surprised, but he quickly returned to a professional expression. I understand. Let's discuss the details. For the next hour, we carefully reviewed every item in my will. Tobias and his family had been the primary beneficiaries. They were to receive the house, my savings, my share of the print shop, and all of my personal belongings, except for a few memorabilia bequeathed to Dorothy and a couple of other close friends. I had now decided to change this arrangement drastically. I planned to donate a large portion of the proceeds from the sale of the house to establish a scholarship fund for students in the literature department at the college where I taught. Another portion would go to support the local library. The remainder to be divided between an investment portfolio to provide for my life and a trust fund for my grandchildren, which they would not receive until they reached the age of 25. And Tobias? Malcolm asked, taking notes. He practically owns the print shop as it is, I answered. As for the rest, I'll leave him a token amount. Enough so that the will can't be contested on the grounds that I've forgotten about my son. Malcolm looked at me over his glasses. May I ask what the reason was for such a drastic change? I sighed. Malcolm wasn't just our lawyer. He was a friend of Randall's and probably deserved some explanation. Yesterday was my birthday, I began. And Tobias had chosen that day to demand my house. Not ask for it, not discuss it, demand it. As if I'd already outlived my usefulness and should quietly step aside, making room for them. Malcolm frowned but said nothing, letting me continue. That was the last straw. For years, I'd been their ATM and on-demand babysitter. Always available, always willing to help, always sacrificing my plans for their convenience. And never a person with her own desires and the right to be respected. I fell silent, feeling a wave of bitterness rising inside at the memory of all the times my needs had been ignored, my plans dismissed as unimportant, my time deemed less valuable than theirs. Randall would have given a lot to live to be my age, I continued more quietly. And they talk about my remaining years as if I were already 1 foot in the grave. I'm not ready to put up with that. I'm not ready to live someone else's life. Malcolm nodded slowly, his gaze softening. I understand, Castile, and if I may make a personal observation, I fully support your decision. Randall would have resented treating you that way. We continued working on the documents. Malcolm explained to me all the legal nuances involved in changing a will and setting up trust funds. He also advised me to update the power of attorney for medical decisions, designating Dorothy rather than Tobias as the person in charge. I'll have all the necessary documents ready by Monday, he said when we were done. Will you be able to stop by to sign them? I nodded, feeling strangely relieved, as if I'd lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for years. After my meeting with Malcolm, I went to a cafe nearby for a cup of tea and to collect my thoughts. Sitting at the window overlooking the busy street, I thought about my new life plan. I needed to decide where to move to after selling the house. I opened my tablet and began searching for information on coastal towns. Galveston caught my eye. A small city on the Gulf Coast, close enough to Irving to visit my grandchildren if desired, but far enough away to start a new life. While browsing real estate listings in Galveston, I came across a picture that made me swoon. It was a small 2-story Victorian-style house painted a soft blue with white trim and a spacious front porch. It was located a few blocks from the beach, in a quiet historic neighborhood. The description mentioned original wood floors, an updated kitchen, and a small but well-maintained garden. I sent an inquiry to a local real estate agent, attaching a link to the listing. To my surprise, a response came almost instantly. A woman named Bethany Rodriguez offered to arrange a virtual tour of the house the same evening or a real showing on any convenient day. I opted for the virtual tour at 7 p.m., deciding that if I liked the house, I would drive down to Galveston in the next few days. When I got home, I found a message from Veronique. She had already contacted several potential buyers, and 2 had expressed serious interest. They wanted to view the house soon. When would it be convenient for you to arrange a showing? She asked. I wondered. Tobias and Merritt usually stop by my house on Sundays to drop the kids off for the day or pick them up after a weekend spent at Grandma's. But this weekend, they had a trip to the country club planned. Merritt had mentioned it in one of our conversations. Tomorrow from 10 to 6, I replied. That gave enough time for a few showings, and I was sure my son and daughter-in-law wouldn't show up unexpectedly. Veronique confirmed that she would organize 2 screenings, the first at 11, the second at 2 in the afternoon. That evening at 7 sharp, I connected to a video call for a virtual tour of the Galveston home. Bethany, an energetic middle-aged woman with a pleasant smile, showed me room by room, answering all my questions in detail. The house was smaller than my current one, but perfect for one person. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, a bright kitchen with a large window overlooking the garden. But the main treasure was the terrace on the second floor, which overlooked the bay. On a clear day, you can see the ships coming into the harbor, Bethany said, showing the view from the terrace. And the sunsets are magical. I could feel the confidence growing inside me that this was exactly what I was looking for. A place to start a new chapter of my life, away from reproach and demands, away from the feeling that I was just a tool for someone else's convenience. The neighborhood is very quiet, Bethany continued. Mostly older couples and creative people live here. There's a lovely coffee shop 2 blocks away where a book club meets in the evenings. A book club. I remember dreaming of returning to regular reading and discussion of literature after retirement. Another dream deferred due to endless requests and demands from family. I love this house, I said as the virtual tour came to an end. I'd like to come and see it in person in the next few days. Bethany brightened up. Of course. When would be convenient for you? We agreed on Wednesday, and I booked a room at a small hotel nearby, planning to spend a couple days in Galveston to get to know the city better. After the call, I sat in a chair by the fireplace, my favorite place to think. Memories of life in this house flashed through my mind, the happy years with Randall, growing up with Tobias, family holidays, quiet evenings with a book. But along with that came the realization that the last few years here had been filled not so much with joy as with the feeling that I was taking someone else's place. A place that others had already claimed. I thought about how my relationship with my son had changed since Randall's death. Tobias had always been closer to his father. They shared an interest in business, sports, practical things. I, on the other hand, was more contemplative, drawn to books, art, ideas. Randall was able to balance our worlds, finding common ground with both his practical son and his dreamy wife. Without him, the bond gradually thinned until it became a relationship based on obligation and profit. Perhaps I was guilty of this too. Giving in too easily, saying no too rarely, putting other people's needs before my own too often. Accustomed them to seeing me not as a person but as a function, a convenient grandmother, a financial resource, the keeper of a home they already considered their own. Now that was changing. No loud words or accusations, no dramatic scenes, just decisive action to regain control of my own life. Sunday was spent preparing for showings. I removed family photos from prominent places, arranged fresh flowers in the living room and kitchen, and wiped down every surface to a shine. The house had to look immaculate to impress potential buyers. First to arrive were the Parker couple, a successful surgeon and his wife, a landscape designer. They carefully inspected every room, asked questions about communications, were interested in the history of the neighborhood. They were especially impressed with the garden, which I have created and maintained over the years. You can feel the love here, Mrs. Parker said as she looked at the bed of perennial roses. Every plant is in its place. Everything is in harmony. I smiled, touched by her understanding. This garden was truly my brainchild, my place of strength and peace. The second visitors were Matthew and Daniel Forsyth, a young couple with 2 stepchildren. They were looking for a spacious home in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. The children, boys ages 8 and 10, were running around the yard with excited exclamations while their parents discussed possible furniture rearrangements and color schemes for the kids' rooms. As I watched them, I caught myself thinking that I would love it if they were the ones to buy the house. There was a genuine warmth and respect in their attitude toward each other and the children, something that was sorely lacking in Tobias and Merritt's relationship. After the second couple left, Veronique stayed late to discuss the impressions of the prospective buyers. Both families are very interested, she said. I expect to have concrete offers by tomorrow. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. The thought of selling the house had seemed unthinkable not so long ago, but now it felt right, liberating. In the evening, Tobias called. His voice sounded strained. Obviously, he was still unhappy with our conversation at the restaurant, but he tried to hide it. "Mom, how are you?" he asked with feigned concern. "I'm fine, thanks," I replied neutrally. "Listen, about that conversation, Merritt and I may have been too forward. It's just that we really think it would be the best solution for everyone." I remained silent, not wanting to revisit the subject. "Anyway," he continued after a pause, "we thought we'd start small. Maybe we should remodel the kitchen first. It's a little outdated, and if you ever decide to sell the house, an updated kitchen would increase its value." That's it. They were already planning renovations to my house without waiting for me to agree to hand it over. Typical tactic. Give the appearance of caring, but in reality, gradually take control. "Thank you for the offer, Tobias, but I'm perfectly happy with my kitchen," I said calmly. "Mom, you don't understand," he began with that peculiar tone he used when he thought he knew better. "Today's consumers are very picky about kitchens. Granite countertops, new appliances, an island in the middle. That's what's trending right now. I don't plan to sell the house anytime soon," I lied, feeling only a slight prick of conscience. "So there's no need for me to follow real estate trends." There was a tense pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," he said finally with ill-concealed irritation. "Whatever you say. Just keep in mind that we're ready to help when you change your mind. When, not if." He was sure he'd get his way sooner or later. After the conversation, I sat in silence for a long time, looking at my outdated kitchen, spacious, cozy, with wooden cabinets that Randall and I had chosen together, a wide windowsill where I grew spicy herbs, and a collection of ceramic mugs I'd collected over years of travel. Every object here had a story, every corner held memories, and they wanted to replace it all with faceless granite surfaces and fancy appliances to fit someone else's idea of modern trends. On Monday morning, the big event started happening right from the beginning. Veronique called to report that both families viewing the house had made offers, and both were above the original asking price. "They're willing to haggle," she said with poorly concealed satisfaction. "I think we can get even better terms if we give them a chance to improve their offers." I agreed with her strategy, asking only to note that the Forsyth family had made a particularly favorable impression on me. I then went to Malcolm's office to sign the new will and trust documents. When all the formalities were completed, he shook my hand with genuine respect. "Castilla, I admire your determination," he said. "Not everyone is capable of starting a new life at this stage." I smiled, appreciating his delicacy. "Thank you, Malcolm. I think Randall would approve of my decision." "He certainly would," he nodded. "He always said that your ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles was one of the qualities he valued most in you." Those words warmed my soul, a reminder that there was once a man who saw and appreciated me for who I was. Galveston greeted me with sunshine and a salty breeze off the bay. The car with my things wasn't due until the evening, so I stood on the porch of my new home with nothing but a small suitcase and a bag containing my most treasured books, photos, and a few pieces of memorabilia. The blue Victorian house looked exactly as I remembered it from my tour a week ago. Soft blue walls, white trim, a wide veranda with wicker chairs, a small but manicured garden with oleanders and rosemary, 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, 1 on the first floor and 2 upstairs, a spacious living room with high ceilings, a bright kitchen with a window overlooking the garden, and the main attraction, a second-floor terrace overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. I pulled out my keys, heavy, old-fashioned keys, and opened the front door. The house smelled of fresh paint, lemon polish, and a little bit of the sea. Bethany, my realtor, had taken care of everything. The windows were washed, the floors were waxed, and on the kitchen table was a basket of fruit, a bottle of wine, and a note. "Welcome to Galveston, Castilla." I walked slowly through the rooms, getting used to the idea that this was now my home. It was much smaller than the mansion in Irving, but every corner seemed cozy and full of character. The original wood floors, the vintage light fixtures, the built-in bookshelves in the living room. The events of the past few weeks had unfolded at breakneck speed. The house in Irving was sold to the Forsyth family, just as I had hoped. They offered the best price and, more importantly, genuinely loved the house at first sight. Matthew and Daniel vowed to keep the rose garden I had so long and lovingly created. Tobias still didn't know about the sale. I had listed my lawyer as the contact person for all the formalities, and I had gone on a short vacation as soon as the preliminary contract was signed. My phone was off most of the time. I attributed it to poor connection at the vacation spot. In fact, I was actively engaged in finding and arranging a new house, doing the paperwork, organizing the move. I didn't want Tobias or Merritt to stop me from taking that decisive step. I climbed the wooden stairs to the second floor and stepped out onto the terrace. The view was breathtaking, the vast blue of the bay, the white sails of yachts in the distance, the soft outline of the shore. The air was saturated with salt and freedom. I inhaled deeply, feeling the tension of the past weeks, or was it years, was beginning to let go. Toward evening, the car with my belongings arrived. I hadn't taken much with me, mostly books, paintings, and a few pieces of furniture that had special meaning to me. The chair Randall liked to sit in, my desk, the antique clock I'd gotten from my grandmother. The rest was either left to the new owners of the house or sold at auction, with the proceeds adding to my investment portfolio. The movers moved everything into the house quickly and neatly, arranging the large items according to my instructions. When they left, I was alone in the half-furnished house, surrounded by boxes and new possibilities. Fatigue came on suddenly. I'd been living on adrenaline for the past weeks, moving from one task to the next. Now that the major hassles were behind me, my body reminded me of my age. I decided not to unpack today. Instead, I opened the bottle of wine Bethany had left behind, poured a glass, and walked out onto the terrace to watch the sunset. The sky was turning all shades of pink and orange, reflecting in the calm water of the bay. I raised my glass in a silent toast to a new beginning, to freedom, to the opportunity to live my remaining years the way I wanted, not someone else. The morning began with birdsong and the sound of waves. I woke up in an unfamiliar room, on an unfamiliar bed, and for a moment I was confused. Then I remembered, this was my new home, my new life. The feeling was strange, a mixture of excitement, nostalgia, and something akin to a child's delight before an adventure. I made coffee in the still uninhabited kitchen and stepped out onto the veranda with a cup. Morning Galveston was full of life. Neighbors walking their dogs, athletes jogging, cyclists passing by. A few passers-by waved at me in a friendly manner, even though we were strangers. There was something comforting about this simple courtesy, as if the city was welcoming me into its community. I decided to start the day with a walk around the neighborhood. I put on a light dress, a straw hat, protection from the southern sun, and set out to explore my new neighborhood. Galveston's historic district turned out to be a charming place. Narrow streets with Victorian houses, little stores, cafes with terraces. I found a grocery market where I bought fresh fruits and vegetables, stopped at a bakery for bread, and discovered a small bookstore with an intriguing sign that read, Sea Stories. The owner, an energetic woman in her 60s with a short haircut and brightly colored beads, introduced herself as Eleanor. "Are you new here?" she asked, packing a book I'd chosen by a local author about Galveston's history. "Yeah, I just moved in yesterday," I replied. "I bought a house on Lavender Street. A blue Victorian?" Eleanor perked up. "I know that house. It was empty for a few months after Grace moved closer to the kids in Austin. It's a great choice. You'll have a wonderful view of the sunsets." We got to talking. Turns out Eleanor had lived in Galveston all her life, knew the history of every house in the historic neighborhood, and could recommend everything from the best local restaurant to the most reliable plumber. "We have a book club here on Wednesdays right in the store," she said before I left. "We're reading Margaret Atwood right now. Come if you're interested." I thanked her for the invitation, feeling unexpectedly excited. A book club! How many times had I dreamed of joining one in Irving, but there were always more important things to do, helping Tobias with the kids, cooking dinner for their guests, shopping for merit. On my way home, I ran into a neighbor, a tall, gray-haired man who was trimming the hedges in front of his house across the street. "Welcome to our neighborhood," he greeted me, setting down his garden shears. "I'm Howard Price, your neighbor." "Castilla Harlow," I extended my hand. "Nice to meet you." "If you need help with anything, feel free to ask," he offered. The first time in a new place is never easy. We talked a little about the neighborhood, the weather, gardening. Howard turned out to be a former marine biology professor who had retired 5 years ago. He now wrote popular science books about the marine life of the Gulf of Mexico and gave field trips for school children. "My wife, Marianne, will be sure to stop by the other day," he said before we said goodbye. "She makes the best blueberry muffins in Galveston." I returned home with bags full of groceries and the feeling that I had taken the first steps toward making new connections. It was strange and a little unsettling. For so many years, I'd lived in an established social circle where all the roles had long been assigned. Now I had to start from scratch, to present myself to new people not as Tobias's mother or Evelyn and Parker's grandmother, but simply as Castile Harlow, a woman with her own interests, history, and personality. The next few days passed in the hassle of setting up house. I unpacked, put books on shelves, hung pictures, and purchased missing furniture and household items. The house gradually filled with life, becoming an extension of myself. I paid special attention to my study, a small room on the second floor with a window overlooking the bay. Here stood my old desk, bookshelves with my favorite volumes, a comfortable chair for reading. On the wall, I hung the painting Randall had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary, a seascape by an unknown artist, found in a small gallery on our trip to New England. In this room, I planned to resume work on the book I had begun writing after retirement, a study of images of women in 20th century American literature. A folder of notes and drafts that had lain untouched for several years now took pride of place on the desk. On the 5th day of my new life, when the house was already more or less settled and I began to get used to the measured rhythm of the seaside town, the bell rang. Tobias. I knew this moment was inevitable, but I felt my shoulders tense at the sight of his name on the screen. "Yes, Tobias," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Mom?" His tone was strange, a mixture of distrust and rising anger. "What's going on? I came to your house and there's some strange family there. They say they bought the house. Is there some kind of mistake?" I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. "No, Tobias, there's no mistake. I sold the house." There was a long pause. I could almost physically feel him trying to process this information. "You... what?" He finally squeezed it out. "What do you mean you sold it? When? Why? Without consulting me?" "3 weeks ago," I answered calmly. "I didn't need counseling. This was my home, and I had every right to use it as I saw fit." "Mom, are you out of your mind?" His voice rose. "How could you sell the family home without discussing it with the family? Where are you now? What's going on?" "I moved, Tobias. I bought a house in Galveston, by the sea." "Galveston?" He said the name of the town like I said on Mars. "Why? What would an old woman do there alone? And why didn't you tell us? There it is." Old woman. There it is again. The definition that's supposed to explain why I don't have the right to make my own decisions. "Because it's my decision, Tobias," I said firmly. "I don't have to agree with you about where and how I should live." "But we talked about this." He sounded genuinely indignant. "We discussed that the house was too big for you, that you needed something more compact. But we meant an apartment nearby, not a house in another city." "No, Tobias." I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "You didn't discuss it with me. You confronted me with the fact. You decided that I should give you the house and move wherever you wanted me to go. Well, that's not what I decided." "And you didn't even consult us?" His tone became accusatory. "Mom, we're your family. We care about you. How can you be so selfish? Selfish." That word hit me with a sudden pain. All my life, I've tried to be a good mother, a caring grandmother, a reliable support for my family, always putting their needs before my own. And now that I've made a choice for myself for the first time in years, am I selfish? "I'm not selfish, Tobias," I answered, my voice shaking. "I'm just finally starting to live my life, not yours." What are you talking about? Tobias said. His voice now had the tone he used when he was talking to cranky children. Mom, you're clearly not yourself. Where exactly are you? I'll come and get you. We'll discuss this calmly. No, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. I'm home. In my new house, the one I picked out myself and bought with the money I got from the sale of the last one. Home? He snorted. What house in Galveston? You don't know anyone there. All your friends and family are here in Irving. Think of the kids. How are they going to see their grandmother? Here's a map of the grandkids. I've been waiting for him to play it. Galveston isn't on the other side of the world, Tobias, I replied. 4 hours away. You can take the kids on weekends. It's a beautiful beach. They'll love it. At your age, he began. Stop talking about my age, I interrupted. I'm 66, not 96. I'm sane, in good health, and perfectly capable of making decisions about my own life. There was a heavy pause. I could hear him breathing intermittently. Okay, he finally said, and his voice became cold, businesslike. All right. But what about the money? How much did you get for the house? I hope you didn't let the realtors cheat you? The money. Of course I did. Concern for my well-being was quickly replaced by concern for my finances. I got a good price, I replied evasively. And I made good use of the funds. What do you mean managed? There was a twinge of concern in his voice. Mom, tell me you didn't give the money to some crook. At your age, people fall prey to pyramid schemes and the like. Tobias, I sighed, feeling tired of this conversation. I was a literature teacher, not a financial analyst like you. But that doesn't mean I'm naive or stupid. I consulted with professionals and invested in safe assets. Some of the money went to buy a new house, some to charity, and the rest will provide me with a comfortable life. Charity? His voice broke into a shout. You gave our money to charity? Not our money, Tobias, I corrected him. Mine, the money from the sale of my house. The house that was supposed to be ours! He could no longer hide his anger. The house we planned for our children! How could you do this to us? I felt a wave of irritation rising inside me. Tobias, listen to me carefully. This was my house, mine and your father's. We bought it with the money we earned from our hard work. And it wasn't meant for you or your children. It was our home, a place where we lived and were happy. The fact that you thought you had some kind of claim to it while I was still alive is your problem, not mine. You just don't understand. His voice shook. We cared about you. We wanted you to be comfortable, to not be alone. And you ruined everything with your selfishness. No, Tobias, I said calmly. You didn't care about me. You cared about the house you wanted. You cared about the money you thought you already had. You didn't see me as a person with my own desires and rights, but as an obstacle to be bypassed in order to get what you wanted. That's not true, he exclaimed. We love you. You are our mother, our grandmother. Yes, I am your mother and grandmother, I agreed. But I'm also a woman who has a right to her own life, who doesn't want to be just a convenient grandmother, babysitting your kids on demand, or an ATM dispensing money for your needs. I'm a person, Tobias, with dreams, plans, desires, and I have the right to pursue them. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard muffled voices. Apparently Merritt was beside him saying something. Mom, his voice changed, more reserved. I understand that you're upset. Maybe we really were too insistent about the house. But let's not make any hasty decisions. Why don't we meet and talk things over? We could come to your place in Galveston this weekend. I almost smiled. Tobias had always been a good negotiator. Now he was trying to change tactics, seeing that anger and accusations weren't working. All right, I agreed. Come by on Saturday, I'll text you the address. Great, he sounded relieved. So it's a deal. And Mom, I'm glad you're okay. We were worried. After the conversation, I sat on the terrace for a long time, looking out over the bay. The sun was slipping toward sunset, coloring the water with golden tones. I'd expected to feel guilt, doubt, maybe even regret about my decision after talking to Tobias. But instead I felt strangely calm and confident that I'd done the right thing. All my life I had tried to be a good mother, supportive, understanding, helpful. But somewhere along the way, that support turned into self-sacrifice, and that help turned into an addiction. I allowed my son and daughter-in-law to see me not as a person, but as a function. And worst of all, I began to see myself that way. Now that was changing. I wasn't going to sever my relationship with my son or give up my role as grandmother, but I was no longer going to allow myself to be used or dictated how I lived my life. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted my musings. An elderly woman with a kind face and a basket in her hand stood on the threshold. "Good evening," she smiled. "I'm Mary Ann Price, Howard's wife from across the street. I came to welcome a new neighbor and brought some muffins." "Castilla Harlow." I held out my hand. "It's so nice to meet you. Howard mentioned you were coming in. Please come in." Mary Ann turned out to be a former music teacher with a passion for gardening and local history. We talked for almost 2 hours, discovering many common interests, from classical literature to jazz music. "Next Wednesday, we're having a book club at Eleanor's store," she said, getting ready to leave. "And Thursday is a watercolor class at the community center. You should definitely join if you're interested." I thanked her for the invitation, feeling a slight thrill. Book club, painting, things I'd dreamed of doing for years, but always found reasons to put off. "The kids need help with their homework. Merritt asked me to watch Parker. He has a slight cold. Tobias has an important meeting. I need to make dinner for his coworkers." Now, I could decide how to spend my time. It was a heady feeling of freedom, but also a realization of missed opportunities. How many years had I wasted living someone else's plans and priorities? How many books hadn't I read? How many places hadn't I visited? How many ideas hadn't I realized because I had always put other people's needs before my own? That night, I decided to start a new tradition of doing something for myself every day. Something that brings joy, develops, inspires. The first such action was signing up for book club and watercolor classes. The second was getting back to work on the book I started writing after retirement. I pulled out a folder of notes, reread what I had written, and felt a long-forgotten creative enthusiasm awaken inside. Going to bed in my new bedroom, with the window open to the sound of the surf, I felt peaceful. Tomorrow there was much to do. Setting up the garden, finding the nearest farmer's market, signing up at the local library. But now, in the stillness of the night, I relished the simple realization. I was free. Free to be myself, to live my life, to follow my desires. And that freedom was worth all the struggles, all the unpleasant conversations, all the doubts. I fell asleep thinking that my new shore was not just a geographical location, but a new stage of life where I could finally just be Castile Harlow, not someone's mother, grandmother, or convenient resource.